Mark chapter 14, starting verses 1 to 11. Hear the word of the Lord. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him, for they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people." And while he was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, "Why was the ointment wasted like this? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me, for you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. May the Lord add his blessings to the reading of his holy word. Now, what is this for? What we're doing right now. Joyce is out of place. She's supposed to be there. She's there. This throws me off. Joyce sitting back there. She doesn't talk about her. Anyway, what is this for? Is this for comforting you? It's for challenging you? Is it just basically to confirm you in what you already believe? Is it for changing you? What's it for? I mean, you're here for a reason. You've done a cost-benefit analysis, as the economists would say, and concluded in your analysis that coming here is better for you than anything else you could be doing. Now, for some of you, it may have been a close call. It may have been, sleeping late, maybe, but it's close. But you finally decided this was the thing. Now, why is that? What is this for? People might know the right answer to say, but when it comes to actual practice, they might expect something else. Why do we have resource officers in schools? I call them resource officers. From what I can tell, schools started having police officers on campus after the Columbine shooting in the late 90s to prevent that from ever happening again. But since, of course, the chance of a shooting happening at any given school is so extremely low, the resource officers are given other responsibilities to fill their time, like helping take care of discipline problems, maybe just relating to the kids so they aren't afraid of the police, and so on. Deputy Scott Peterson of the Broward County Sheriff's Department was named Resource Officer of the Year in 2014, kind of like being named Teacher of the Year in your school district. The award handed to him praised him for having, quote, proven to be reliable at handling issues with tact and judgment. He was the officer on duty at Marjorie Douglas Stoneman High School on February 14th when a deranged ex-student started shooting people. He came to the entrance of the building where the shooting was going on and, according to the Sheriff's Department, took a, quote, defensive position outside with his gun in his hand, but he never entered while students and faculty were being killed inside. The sheriff, after reviewing videotape of him doing essentially nothing, said that he was, quote, devastated, sick to my stomach, and he placed the resource officer on leave without pay, essentially firing him. He forgot, the officer, what he was for. What are you for? If you're a rational person, a calculator of everything by cost-benefit analysis, then you must have reason that coming here, going through this service, enduring, believe it or not, enduring this sermon, somehow gets you something that's better for you than anything else you could be doing. If you have a goal, you know what you want out of life, then you ask yourself, what is this for? How does this help me in what I want? Top athletes center their whole lives, from everything they eat to their sleep to their motivational talks they listen to or the music they listen to their workouts, of course. Around every exercise they choose to do is around, how does this help me? It's not just kind of generally how can I get in better shape, but how does this particularly help me be a better basketball player or a football or baseball player, depending on what kind of player they are, what position they play. It shapes what kind of exercises they do. A good business person is ruthless about asking whether this, whatever it is, really helps the business. Will spending good money to put another sign out by the road advertising that there is a Chinese restaurant here, will that bring in more customers than who will make more profits for us than the sign is worth? Then I have to pay to get a new sign. If they think it is, they'll spring for the sign. If they think it isn't, they won't. It's as simple as that. Now, if they think, I want a nice, impressive sign for the look, to be respectable, all the reputable, good restaurants have signs out on the road. I want it for my image. I want it for my ego. Then they're probably not good business people. By the way, we got our sign out on the road for free, in case you're wondering. Absolutely free from God's Pit Crew. Only paid a little bit, ordered online for the lettering we put up on it, and we installed it ourselves. I originally wanted the sign on the building. It says the gym on it. My original idea was to have it say the Providence Building, which is 21 letters. But then I learned it cost $30 per letter. So I soon saw the rationality of the much shorter the gym. So that's how the gym came about. Only, you do the math, 6 letters, $30 per letter. Yeah, it's not very much. So we went with that. So we asked, how does this help me get what I want? Well, that depends on what you want. You want to be happy, I guess. We all want to be happy. Now, how does, whatever you're doing, how does this make me happy? That's what you're for at any given time. So you ask yourself, how does coming to church, going to work, you got the bills to pay, and that makes you happy. The check does, if not the work doesn't. Watching the Olympics, how does that make you happy? Running, swimming, napping, stopping at Dairy Queen, going to a movie, having a job, a career, getting married, having a family. How does any of that get me what I want? What good is it? And then we ask, what is Jesus for? What good is he? Is Jesus for our happiness? Yes, but how does he help you get it? Well, we hope he will help us get what we're for, happiness, and that's true, but what is Jesus for? We see that here in this passage in 6 parts. There's first the plot. Second, there's the pouring out. Third, there's the protest. Fourth, there's the purpose. Fifth, there's the proclamation. And finally, 6th, there's the plot, part 2. First, there's the plot. Jesus is in Jerusalem teaching daily in the temple. The Passover is only 2 days away, and so this is probably about Tuesday of this week. The chief priests and the scribes were plotting to arrest him. What Jesus is for does not further what they are for. Now, for us, that's no surprise. We don't feel betrayed by that. We just read that kind of casually. The priests and the scribes were conspiring against Jesus. We think, yeah, of course. And we've heard the story so many times. We know that they are the bad guys. Okay, it's just, we've read the end of the story. There's not a, what do they call it? Giveaway. It's not a spoiler for us. We know they're the bad guys, but for the disciples, the people around Jesus at this time, even the early church later, this was shocking. This would just be utterly shocking. This would be like being told the people high in our government are conspiring against the country. Even though you have had people for the past year screaming collusion, but I won't get into that. But it would be like being told our president and our leaders are conspiring with the enemies of the United States. Now, we might disagree. We might disagree with the past president. Maybe we disagree with this president about strategies. We might disagree about the strategies about how to deal with our enemies. We might think such and such a president has chosen strategies that are counterproductive, that don't work. But I think we'd be shocked if we found out that the president, even the president we disagreed with, was actually plotting intentionally against the country. I mean, that would be shocking, wouldn't it? So here, the people, they may have criticized the scribes and the priests. They may have scoffed at them. They may have even made fun of them behind their backs. But they wouldn't have thought that they would be conspiring against the Messiah, that they would turn out opposed to God's kingdom. That's just shocking to them. Now, we need to understand today that many religious leaders, sometimes they lead whole denominations or large churches or sometimes small churches, or teach the Bible in universities or even or seminaries or even small Sunday school classes. They're not always for what Jesus is for. Often they're for their pensions, their job security, their organizations, their tenure, their reputation. Now, that's not always the case. There are good ones, but we mustn't be naive and think just because someone's in the religion business that they're for Jesus. Here, they're plotting against Jesus. They're seeking in verse 1 to arrest him by stealth, secretly, when the crowds aren't around, because he was popular. Jesus is popular with most of the people there. He had a protective popularity. They want to arrest him, and they want to arrest him, by the way, as Mark says here, not just to interrogate him or not just to warn him, you better stop this, go back to Galilee and leave us alone. It's not to scare him away, like they'll try a few months later with Peter and John, but they want to arrest him specifically to kill him. That's what Mark says. Now, why? Mark here doesn't give the reasons, but obviously, people seek what they are for. They thought killing Jesus was the only way to get what they were for. Preserving their lifestyle, their perks, their place in society. Jesus was a threat to that, and so he had to go, they thought. That's the human motivations on one level, but what was God and Jesus for? We know from Acts chapter 4, verse 28, that the two main decision makers here, the two men who would decide that this plot would be successful, that Jesus would die, Herod and Pontius Pilate, they sentenced him to die. They fulfilled the plot here. Now, they did it for their own human reasons, but ultimately, it says in Acts 4:28, they did it because they did what God's hand and God's plan had predestined to take place. That plot, this plot here, was presided over by God to do what he's for. Then there's the pouring out. Jesus is staying in Bethany, what we'd probably call today a suburb of Jerusalem. It's just a small town just outside the city, outside the big city. Now, he's invited to dinner at the house of Simon the leper, it says. And we really don't know anything about him, but it doesn't say here. But we can guess that Simon was healed by Jesus, and the dinner is probably to celebrate that gracious healing. So it's a good time. Remember, these are all friends of Jesus. They're celebrating healing. It was a party. There's lots of laughter. There's good food. It's relaxed. It's happy small talk going on. It's retelling stories of how leprosy was healed, how Simon went to the priest. And you should have seen the look on their faces when I told them, Jesus healed me. Everyone laughs. Let's have another drink. Cheers to Simon the ex-leper. And Jesus is sitting back as they ate then, kind of leaning on a cushion, enjoying the celebration. A woman comes in. Everybody knows her. Probably barely noticed at first. She has an alabaster flask, very ornate, very expensive looking, like something someone would have on a shelf, on display, put proudly in your living room. Look what I have. And it's like fine china. It's too expensive to actually ever use. You just display it in your case. The only way, it doesn't have a cap or cork, and so the only way to use its contents, to pour it out, is by breaking it. And it's so precious, you may never want to do that, or if you do, on very special occasion. You must break it to get the ointment out. So you would either keep it as an ornament, never to use it, just to kind of look at it and admire it, this precious thing you have. Admiring not only the value of the flask itself, but the precious ointment inside. Maybe if you're a rational business person, calculate cost-benefit ratio. You wait until the price of the flask goes up. The ointment gets more expensive out there on the ointment market. It's an investment. Then you would sell it, make your profit. It's an investment for your future wealth. Or Or maybe you'd wait for the most important moment of your life, some very special, once-in-a-lifetime occasion, and use it for that. Maybe it was given to her by our mother or grandmother, a precious gift handed down, a family heirloom, on her maybe to be used on her wedding day. That's what it's for, something special, to once-in-a-lifetime pouring out. And now she has this precious thing. And whatever she thought it was for before this, now she knows what it's for. She breaks it. Suddenly the small talk comes to a hush. Something astounding, something rare has just happened. She broke that expensive flask and then pours it all out over Jesus' head. And you can see it trickling down his hair and across his face, into his beard, down into his body, all the way down to his feet. It was a very costly, pure nard, probably imported from India. In verse 5, the other people in the room say it's worth 300 denarii. That's about a year's wage for an average worker. So let's say, in our terms, about $30,000. So you're seeing $30,000 worth of ointment streaming down Jesus' head and body, all poured out. What's it for? Is that a good use of that much value? Calculate. You're doing the analysis of what's good for you. According to what's valuable to you, according to your cost-benefit analysis, is that a rational use of that capital? You could buy a good new car with that. You could put a down payment on a home with that. If you think Jesus is all about, maybe you think, okay, that's selfish, I'm not going to do that. You think Jesus is all about being for others. Think how many poor people you could help with $30,000. You know, in foreign countries, poor countries, you could build whole churches or feed thousands or dig wells in Ethiopia for $30,000. Think according to what's valuable to you. Is it worth it? Is it worth pouring out $30,000, a whole year's worth of work, of ointment on Jesus just to soothe him and make him smell good? There's so many other needs in the world, aren't there? Is it worth it? That's what the protesters were thinking. And so there's the protest in verses 4 and 5. Some there in this friendly gathering protested. Now remember, this is not like when he's invited to some Pharisee's home. It's a mixed group with a bunch of skeptics and enemies, kind of looking, with a lizard eye, trying to catch him at some opportunity that he says something wrong. These are all friends here, as far as we can tell. They're disciples. The disciples are all there. This is a friendly gathering. The woman was Mary, the sister of Lazarus, and he was there too, telling his story. But they were indignant, his friends. They thought it was a righteous protest. These are good people with good values. They thought they knew what religion, what Jesus was all about, what he was for. He was about helping others, especially about those who can't help themselves, the poor. So in their righteous indignation, at the end of verse 4, why was this ointment, notice that word, wasted? There's the word, wasted, like this. Notice, according to their values, the values of Jesus' friends and other disciples, pouring it out all on Jesus, that's a waste. Where's the practical value in that? This kind of extravagance. That's not what we're for. For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. The poor. That's what we're for. We're not selfish people, squander valuable things on our own luxuries. No, we're for the needy, for the helpless. We're for social welfare. We're for building a just, verdant, and peaceful world. We're for bridging the income gap. And this could have helped us do that. And now, look at it. It's wasted, covering Jesus' head and body. $30,000 down the drain like that. And then, how dare you, you inconsiderate, uncaring person. They scolded her because it was wasted, according to them. And these are Jesus' friends. It's wasted. Just on Jesus, they think. What's Jesus for? Yes, Jesus is for the poor, but what is Jesus for first? Is he just as some theologians call him, a man for others, teaching us all by example to lay down our lives for others, to give up seeking our own happiness for the sake of others? Or is he something more than that? Here Jesus shows us something that even many of his friends and disciples, and even many Christians today don't understand. First, foremost, Jesus is for himself, for God, and he is God. That's why he can be for himself without being selfish, without being an idolater. If Jesus was first for the poor, or for you, or for me, he would be an idolater. Idolatry is putting anything before God. If Jesus puts you before God, he's an idolater, but he's not. That's why the expensive flask containing the very costly ointment is not wasted, poured out all over Jesus. There's nothing more worthwhile than anyone could have ever done with it than break it and pour it all out over Jesus. There's nothing more valuable that you can ever do with all of your life than pour it all out for Jesus. And he's asking that you do that. He's telling you here that you need to change your values, your cost-benefit analysis to the point where you finally see that pouring out yourself, all of you, for Jesus is the most worthwhile thing that you can do with your life. And to do it, you'll have to be broken. People today, even many Christians, like Jesus' friends here, tell us, they won't say it out loud, they won't say it in these many concise words. Jesus is not worth that. He's really about others, mainly us. He's about us. Maybe he's about helping the poor, sure, especially if I can get a job in the charity that hands out money to the poor. I mean, I got to take care of myself first. I got bills to pay, before I can help others. And Jesus knows that, so he's going to give me a job so I can help the poor, after I help myself. We don't need to be broken. Jesus is for the family. Whatever is good for my family, my marriage, is what Jesus is for, right? Surely Jesus would never tell us that if we want to be his disciples, we must first hate parents or children, especially not wife or husband. He'd never say that, would he? Jesus is for conservative values. So he's for, just very conveniently, for the politics that just so happens to keep my taxes low, keep my lifestyle like it is. Isn't that very convenient, the way Jesus is for what's good for me? Jesus is for making Israel great again. They even had a red baseball cap that said that on it, in Hebrew, of course, not that Gentile Greek and Latin. That's what they assumed the Messiah would be for. Overthrowing the Romans, giving them freedom from Gentile dominance. He was for us. And if he's for us, we'll be for him. Up till he stops being for us. But here Jesus says his purpose, there's the fourth point, he's for his purpose, and his purpose is his purpose, not ours. His purpose is to make disciples who seek first his kingdom. So he does challenge us. What's he challenge us? He does not whoever loves whiskey more than me. How does he challenge us? Not whoever loves whiskey more than me, whoever loves adultery more than me, or whoever loves splurging on himself more than me is not worthy of me. No. Whoever loves what even the world at its best, what many in the church today said we should be focusing on, family, marriage. He says, whoever loves that more than me is not worthy of me, cannot be my disciple. We have to pour out all our lives, even our marriages and families. His purpose is making disciples who do that. If we love our marriages more than obeying Jesus, we can't be his disciple. If we choose to sin because the sin makes our marriage better, our spouse likes us more because we followed him or her into sin, we've not poured out our lives and are not his disciples. I've told a wife who is following her husband into a sin that supporting her husband in his sin, just passively going along with it, that too is sin. All the scriptures in the Bible, which I believe every one of them, that telling wives to be submissive to their husbands never mean that they follow their husbands into sin. That would be putting the husband ahead of Jesus. A Christian wife can still have a gentle and quiet spirit, respectful, which in God's sight is very precious, submitting to your husband, as Peter writes about in 1 Peter chapter 3, while saying, no, I'm not going to follow you into sin. Now, if that brings disruption, that brings problems, that maybe even hostility or persecution into the marriage itself, then that is the cross that Jesus said you must take up. For the husband, all of that is equally true. But for him to follow his wife into sin, like Adam followed Eve, that's a double failure. If you're following your wife into sin, not only is everything wrong with that's wrong with the wife choosing the husband over Jesus, but you're not only following her into sin, that you're following her at all is sin. I think one of the finest examples of the gentle and quiet spirit, respectful, submissive, but firmly attached to Christ first, is this precious gift we have right here, Ann Scruggs. Back a little over 10 years ago, when we were both in another church. She was the church secretary, and we were separated by only a very thin door, through which I could hear everything going on in her office. Every typewriter stroke I could hear. Once the phone rang, and I could tell it was one of these troubled, non-attending, quote, members who were calling, complaining about the fact that their names were about to be taken off the church membership roll. Now, you would think, well, that maybe I could start attending church again. No, that doesn't occur to them. But they were complaining their names were going to be taken off the church roll because they hadn't attended in years. They were thinking, I guess, what's the church for? A lot of people around us think it's about giving them assurance no matter how they live. It's not for discipling them. So this non-attending, quote, member was calling up, indignant, to complain. Now I thought, hearing this, I should handle this. I assumed this quiet, softly laughing, gentle lady wouldn't want to have anything to do with an angry complainer, and she would just relay the call to me. But she didn't. She took the call herself, and I heard her gently, politely, but firmly explain that you can't be a member of a church you don't attend. I thought, wow, good job. Said it just right, in just the right tone. And I thought, man, this softly laughing, smiling lady is as tough as nails. Who would have thought? You see, when you're for Jesus, your commitment is set on him. You can be submissive and strong because ultimately your submission is to Jesus. Not just a tactic to have a happy marriage. What's in it for you? Or you can be the leader of the family, but not overbearing and selfish tyrant because your leadership is for Jesus. Not just a tactic to get what you want. This woman was for Jesus. Because of that, she suffered the disapproval of the protesters, who were Jesus' friends, who thought that they could have done a lot of good with that expensive flask of ointment. And they criticized her. And we might get, that the religious leaders, even religious leaders then, maybe even today, like the priests and scribes here, who aren't really for Jesus, we might get that. There's people out there that aren't for Jesus, even though they're religious. But what will really surprise us, sometimes hurt us, is when Jesus' friends, both his apparent professed friends and some real friends, were just swept away in their ignorance because they don't yet understand what all this is for. That it's not for us. It's not for our reputation. It's not for having $30,000 that we can then use to dole out to the community and make, people happy. It's for Jesus. It surprises us when we pour out our lives for Jesus, when we drive buses or vans for years to bring kids to hear the gospel. sacrifice our time, our money, our labor to be used by God to further the kingdom of God. And then those who say they are friends of Jesus, and some of them are, but they scold us for it. They tell us we wasted our lives. We've wasted our treasure, our Saturdays or our Sundays. It's hard to face the disapproval of those who claim to be friends of Jesus. But sometimes you must. Whose disapproval is it that tempts you to pull back from pouring out all to Jesus? Well, John Bunyan, the Baptist, Puritan, he faced the disapproval of the government in England. He spent years in jail because of the disapproval of the established church in England, during which he wrote, while he was in jail, the Pilgrim's Progress. He also wrote a hymn, To Be a Pilgrim. I just found that this week. Who would valiant be against all disaster? Let him in constancy follow the Master. There's no discouragement shall make him once relent his first avowed intent to be a pilgrim. Whoso beset him round with dismal stories, like this woman in this story, criticizing her, but do themselves confound his strength, the more is, no foes shall stay his might. Though he with giants fight, he will make good his right to be a pilgrim. Since, Lord, thou dost defend us with thy Spirit, we know we at the end shall life inherit. Then fancies flee away. I fear not what men say. I'll labor night and day to be a pilgrim. What men here said was, that's a waste. But Jesus said in verse 6, she has done a beautiful thing for me. Sometimes, amid the criticism that you're wasting your life on Jesus, the only comfort you have will be the praise of Jesus. You've done a beautiful thing for me. What are you for? Some of these friends of Jesus were for him because they thought he was for them. We have a lot of people like that today. People who think Jesus is all about making them successful, them rich and healthy, and give them good marriages and obedient kids. Sure, Jesus is for the poor, but what do the poor need the most? They need money, we think, financial assistance. We can solve the scourge of poverty if only we give everyone a living wage, we're told. But Jesus tells us here that we'll always have the poor with us. That doesn't mean we don't care. We can't tell people that God loves them and we love them and we don't do anything practical to help them. Be warm, be filled, and then not share. But relief from poverty, a war on poverty, programs to solve poverty are not what the poor need the most. What do we all need the most? We need our poverty of righteousness, our bankruptcy before God relieved. We need our sins paid for by Jesus' death. So Jesus came to die to be the sacrifice for our sins, the propitiation, the appeasing sacrifice when the perfect Son was broken and his life poured out so that God's just anger at our sins could be paid for. Propitiation was the purpose of his death. And this woman anointed his body for burial, preparing him for his purpose. What is Jesus for? He is for the proclamation. He says in verse 9, emphasizing that this is true, this is certain, be assured that this is the case. Wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. And so here we are, fulfilling that prophecy right now, telling it in memory of her. All four of the Gospels have this story in it, so we'll be reminded with every retelling of what Jesus did that he is worth being broken ourselves and pouring out everything for. Notice here that wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, that once again, Jesus sees that there will be a time between his death and resurrection on the one hand and his return on the other. A long interval, an interim, when the gospel is proclaimed, and he says that time when he is not with us physically. That wasn't an accident. The gospel must be proclaimed in the whole world. First, that's what Jesus is for now. He's for getting the gospel out to every person in this world. So if we're for Jesus, ask yourself, how am I helping him get that done? That's why we have Jim Jr. and Jim, so that you can be involved in what Jesus is for. If we have enough people in those ministries, we can start new programs. We can give to missionaries like Testify to help to get the gospel out to Ethiopians, maybe to the Chinese in our area. That's what we're for, because that's what Jesus is for. Then Judas Iscariot in verse 10 continues the plot, started in verses 1 and 2. He's one of those who were grumbling at the waste. It was a waste, pouring out all that expensive ointment on Jesus. He's one of those who, he said he cared for the poor. He wanted to use $30,000 for the needy. Of course, he'd have to take a cut himself. I mean, a commission, it's only right. He's got bills to pay too. But he's for the poor, sort of. I mean, after himself. What he's not for is Jesus. If Jesus were for the poor, now, if he were really for the poor, if he were for society, even for the general welfare, especially if he, that Judas would be for him, especially if if Jesus could give him a job in whatever way he is for the poor, if Jesus could get him something, give him a position, maybe make him treasurer of the new government that he's going to set up. Yeah, I'll be for Jesus if he'll do that for me. If he'll make me the CFO of the big charity that he sets up for the poor, I'll handle the finances there. Or maybe if he'll make me a bishop in his new denomination, I'll be for him then, yeah, sure. But no, if he's not going to do that, it's all about him. If Jesus was only for himself, that's one thing. But if he's for me, he thinks I'd be for Jesus, but he's not. And so it finally dawns on Judas that Jesus is first for himself, and that he demands that we pour out our lives for him too. And so he goes to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. After all, if he can't get anything out for himself out of Jesus, he can get it out of the priest. They were glad to see him. They promised him money. Money is the one thing we never doubt that is always for us. That's why we love money. It's always for us. The wife, the husband, the kids, everybody else might be in it for themselves, just using you for what they can get out of you. But money is for us. We tell the wife, the husband, the kids to do this or that, and they don't. They don't listen to us. They don't obey. But they're not for us. But we tell money to buy dinner. It does it. Tell money to get us new clothes or an iPhone 10. Man, money does exactly what we say. It's for us. That's why we love it so much. That's why Judas wanted the money. When he saw that Jesus was ultimately for him, that Jesus wasn't ultimately for him, but he was for himself, that in his kingdom, that it's a beautiful thing to be broken and pour out ourselves for him, not for me, then, okay, I'll take the money. And countless people do the same today, choosing the money or the wife or husband or reputation over Jesus. But if you want your life to be a beautiful thing, pour it all out for Jesus. Like John Bunyan, who people criticize wasted so many years in prison because he wouldn't conform, or William Carey, who lost a wife and son in India, labored years learning the language, translating the Bible, and only after 7 years saw the first converts, like many others that we don't know, who took buses instead of cars so they could give to evangelism, wives who had to go to church alone over their husband's protest, husbands who suffered the disapproval of unsubmissive wives who think marriage should first and foremost be for them, not for Christ. Jesus says about them all, still today, you've done a beautiful thing for me, being broken, pouring out our lives for Him. After all, Jesus was broken. He's beaten, broken on a cross, poured out His life so that we who were poor, bankrupt in our sin, could have the riches of His righteousness. He was for us so that now we could be for Him. And now we ask you to be for Him. Are you?